Good morning. Some people are on the delayed entry program here. That's all right. It's good seeing everybody. It's good seeing everybody. Wow. You would think after 3 years you'd figured out how this works. So we'll try this again. So I say good morning. Good morning. There we go. That makes me feel better. So we've been talking about the last couple of weeks about just walk over, about the importance of just releasing yourself, releasing the fear, and actually taking the steps to go over and talk to people and to share your faith with people. And, I've been asked, was I going to do something different today? It's the last Sunday before Christmas, and why don't I do some Christmas story or something like that? And my response is quite simple. I am doing the Christmas story. The whole point of what we're about, the whole point of who we are, the whole point of our faith is based on the Christmas story. And we're talking about gifts. And what did we talk about the first week? We said the greatest gift that you could give anybody is what? The introduction of God. The introduction to him. He don't belong to you. You can't give people God. Sorry. But I know what you mean. It's the introduction. The best gift we can give is just to tell people about somebody. And we used the example last week about two guys. One guy is a friend of mine, and I'll say, hey, do you know so-and-so? And he'd be like, no. So here's an example. Tony says, look, Tony and Meet as well. They said, look, I need some work done on my bike. So I told him, I said, hey, do you know so-and-so? See, there was an opportunity for me to share with them about somebody I know. And I was like, hey, do you know so-and-so? And they're like, no, I don't know so-and-so. And I was like, look, he's done this for me. And so I began to explain to them, this is what he's done for me. So Meet needed some work on his bike, and he was like, hey, I'm frustrated. I took it to this person. It didn't work out. So let's take that little part right there. Someone comes to you and they say, look, I'm frustrated. Life is not working out. My wife left me. My job sucks. My finances are terrible. They're telling you all these big things. Meet came and said, look, I had a wreck. My bike's jacked up. I took it to this place, and they just jacked it up. It's all messed up. What do I do? Oh, it's great. Look, what do you do? What did he just do? Just open the door for me to say, hey, look, I know a guy. I know a guy that did a really good job. And he goes, really? And then what I did, I shared my story. I took my bike to him. Matter of fact, I've taken two of my bikes to him. And he did this for me on my bike. He fixed this. He corrected that. He made this better. I've ridden it. I've had no issues with it. I vouch that this guy can do a good job. Meet goes, really? Okay, well, I'll take my bike over there. So it's the same thing. So I'm talking to Meet. Meet's like, look, man, life sucks. Things have been happening in my life. They're just terrible. I don't know what else to do. And I'm like, look, man, I've been where you're at. Let me introduce you to somebody that I know. And this is what he did for me. This is how he helped me. Now, Meet can make two choices. He can say, yeah, my life sucks bad enough. I need to make a changes. Or he says, no, ignore it. I'll just make it work. And see, so those are the first thing we talked about, is this getting to that point of understanding that our job is just to introduce people to God. We talked about the last couple of weeks that it's not our responsibility to save people. None of you here have the power, the ability, or the right to save anybody. So you can't save anybody. Anybody that tells you, yeah, I saved 5 souls today, then they're lying, because they've just said to you, I'm God, and I'm more important than God is. You can't save anybody. God does that. We talked about last week about, as Paul was talking about, and he says, I planted the seed, and someone else watered it, and then God raised the crop. God did the saving. And so what I ask is, there's 3 parts of that we have. There's one is the person that planted the seed. The person that first said, hey, do you know who God is? That person may be the only time they meet somebody, it's the only time to talk to them. They never do anything more. Then there's the person that waters it, the one that keeps bringing it up, keeps talking to them about it when the situation comes. And then there's a third one, and Jesus calls them the laborers. You remember he said the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. It's the people that are actually there to lead them to the prayer of salvation. So you got the person that talks about it, the seeder. You got the person that waters it, the person that continues to add water to the seed that's been planted, and then you got the laborer, the one that goes and actually leads them to Christ. They can be the same person. They can be all different people. So last week we used the example about Howard, how Howard loved to garden. And we all know how Howard loved to garden. Howard did all three jobs. He would plant the seeds in his soil, he would water his vegetables, and then he would actually pick his vegetables. And then he would bring a big barrel. You guys remember? Howard would always bring a big barrel and put it up at the altar. And he said, look, the first 10% of everything I pick comes to the church. And he'd have that big cast iron galvanized tub that belonged to his grandma's, and it'd be full of potatoes or whatever he was picking that time. It's the same thing, but in some places it doesn't work that way. Someone else will plant the seed, they'll hire someone else to do the watering, and then someone else do the picking. And so God works in that same way. So we talked about the how do we give that gift away. The first thing, to be willing, then you got to be able to go into the unzone, you got to listen to the Spirit, and then of course you just have to walk. Last week we talked about how we develop relationships with each other, and then how we just start to discover life stories. And the example I just gave was like with me and Meat. You know, we developed a relationship with each other. We started talking. We know kind of some things that we both like. We know things that we both share from. And then we discovered stories like he was sharing with me. Hey, I got hit again. My bike got jacked up. I don't know what to do. And then I discerned what that meant, and then I took a step forward. I was like, hey, let me talk to you about how you can get this resolved. Let me talk to you about my story. Let me help you get that fixed. And today we're going to finalize this with looking at how this all kind of comes together. So we find out that the first gift that was ever given, the greatest gift that was ever given to you, was what? Jesus. Now, if you ask the child that, what are they going to tell you? Oh, well, it was this gift that my mom bought me this last Christmas. You know, it was this, it was that. You know, Christmas is a time of giving, so we all look at Christmas as the time of gifts, and we talk about this is the greatest gift ever. So we did some of our family stuff yesterday. Sheridan came in. My in-laws came in, so we had the whole family, and it was great. I told my wife it was probably the best Christmas we've ever had because only the people we liked were there. We just had a small group. Sorry, I didn't mean that. We had a small group. So it was real cozy, and I took a picture, and the picture looks just like to me, it looks like a Hallmark card, you know. You got all of them sitting there, and we got a nice pretty red table, and there's my wife serving food, you know, crab legs to everybody. It was like, oh, this is Hallmark, this is great. And so everybody got, you know, so the kids exchanged gifts with each other because they're not going to see each other on Christmas Day, and the grandparents brought theirs, so was everything. So everybody, you know, was doing their thing. So Seth's over there, and he's got his, and he got a little tiny box about that big. And I got one, and my wife got one. Of course, he wanted ours, but he got to have his own. So he goes, and he opens the box, and he doesn't take anything out of it. And we're like, what'd you get? And he goes, nothing. And he puts the box in his pocket. And it's like I said, it's probably about that big and about that deep. And he's like, nothing. And I was like, no, let me see what's in your box. And he's like, no, you ain't got to worry about it. Don't worry about it. Well, I already knew what was in his box. And I was like, so is that your greatest? Yeah, that's my greatest gift I got so far. So you want to guess what was in that little box? Huh? Money. He got money. That was his greatest gift, was money. My father-in-law asked him, he said, what gift do you want? What color do you want? And he says, I just want the color green. That's my favorite color at this time of the year. And so, you know, and my father was like, well, I can handle that. I can pick that out nicely. But see, when we start remember, what is your greatest gift? We all talk about the thing that someone gave you. And if you back to your childhood and say, what was your greatest gift? Oh, I remember when I got my first bicycle. Or I remember when I got this, when I got that. And that's how we associate gifts. But see, God gave us the greatest gift. And we know that's true because he even told us. Anybody heard a verse called John 3:16? He says that he so loved the world that he gave, that's the gift, and he gave what? His son. He gave his only son. So that was the gift that was given to all people. See, it was specialized for you but he also had it for you and for you and for you and all the people that are out here. He says, look, this is the greatest gift that I give you. And then he tells us to do what with that gift? Share it. If it's your greatest gift, you're going to share it with someone else. Now, I'm going to go ahead and disclaim right now, Seth will not share his gift with you. He won't share it with me. He won't share it with anybody. That's his gift. But this is a gift that he expects us to share. Why? Because the more you share that gift, what happens? The more you receive that gift. So if I convince Seth that, look, if you take that gift that you got and you share it with others, you'll get more. Is he going to believe me? But I'm going to have to convince him of that. Now, Seth took a personal finance class, so I've got a little bit of leeway in this, or a little bit of say in this when I say, look, Seth, if you take that gift and you put it in an investment, you'll get more in return. Is he going to believe me? Yeah. Right now he would. Now, 6 months ago, before he took that class at school, he was like, you're crazy. I'm going to do. But I'm like, look, take that money, invest it in this, and you'll get something back. Okay? So what if I said that in some ways it can be the same way? If you take the gift that God gave you and you invest it in other people, you're going to get something back. You're going to get something back. Does that make sense? So the greatest gift, so the first thing I do is realize what the greatest gift is, and then the second part of it is remembering that you can give that gift away. Now, the fear about all this is we think that we can't do stuff like that, and then we lose focus on what we're supposed to be doing. So we got to realize that in order to give this gift, because this gift was given to us, and this gift is beyond something that we deserve, beyond something that we should receive, that because of that, this gift giving is going to be beyond your abilities. Do you hear me? The gift giving is going to be beyond your abilities. And in case you're wondering, that's number one in your little sheets that you have. That's your sheets. People have sheets? Anyway, okay. So number one is beyond my abilities. Now I want you to look at something. Look at Luke chapter 5. I'm going to try to quickly get through this, and I'm going to back up, but I'm going to go through 1 through 11. It says, one day when Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowded among him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats. Left there by the fishermen, who were washing their nets. So the reason why they were washing their nets is what? Because they were done. They were finished. You guys got that? They done their thing. They're finished. They're over there washing their nets. And someone asked me one time, why do they wash their nets? And we'll get into that later. But it's real interesting. My spin on it. He got into one of the boats. So their 2 were sitting there by the edge. He got into one of them, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into deeper water and let down the nets for a catch. So we got this first image, okay? You got that. We see Jesus walking up to this little town, and there's 2 boats sitting over here. And Jesus picks one, which happens to belong to Simon. He gets in the boat, and he says, hey, take me out here a little bit, because I got something to say. I got something I want to tell people. Jesus sits down, and he starts telling people. I don't know what he said, but he starts telling people stuff. And then he looks at Simon. He says, hey, let's go out a little bit deeper and put out your water, or put out your nets. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out in the deep water and let down the nets for a catch. So in verse 5, Simon Peter says, Master. Now, isn't it interesting that he calls him Master? Now, immediately we start thinking about spiritually, right? But probably my guess is, and this is my personal opinion, is he called him Master simply because he was renting his boat. He was in charge of the boat at that time. He was doing, now we don't know, we know money was exchanged or anything like that, but this was his, so he calls him Master. And he says, Master, we have worked all day, we worked hard all night, and we haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. I'm not going to argue with you. You told me to do it. I'm going to do it. Now, let me stop for 1 second. This isn't part of all this, but I was thinking about this earlier today. What is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different response. Now, let me tell you something. I've learned in my little time in life that with God, He asks you to do insane things. So Simon's sitting here saying, look, okay, let me stop for a second and tell you what happened. We have been fishing all night. We have been out here all night long, dropping these nets, pulling them up empty, dropping these nets, pulling them up empty, dropping these nets, pulling them up empty. We're done, we're tired, we're frustrated. We came in, we were washing our nets, we were done. And you're telling me to go drop my net in these same waters again. Would you not think that was insane? Now, what God gave me with this when I was looking at this is a lot of times we do things that God tells us to do and we get the same results, which is not what we necessarily want, and people think we're insane for continuously doing it. But see, what I like about this is even though this was insane, what did He do? He did it anyway. He did it anyway, not knowing the results. But I bet you He expected the same result. Do you guys do that? See, in our life, when God tells you to do things, sometimes it seems like it's an insane thing because you're like, I've already done that, God. I've already done this over and over and over again. I can tell you for myself, I've done things like I've lost something. Anybody lost something? And I've looked for something for hours and hours and hours, and I can't find it. And I've looked in the same spots, and I've torn things up. I mean, I've gone to the same spot in the same part of my closet looking for the same object. That's insane that you go to the same spot looking for something more than once. But I keep going there. And then what do? I stop. I finally get to the point where I just stop. I got to stop looking. I'm driving myself crazy. And then what happens? I find it. Where? Someplace I've already looked. The same place I already looked. See, when God tells you to do something, you may keep trying to do it, but see, everything's in His timing, and you're doing it, and you're like, God, I've already done that. You know, God said, start a church. You're like, okay, I'll start a church. You start a church, people come, it's great. And then all of a sudden, people are like, oh, I don't want to keep doing this. This is too much work, and then they walk away. And you're like, God, I'm doing the same thing over and over. I come up here every Sunday, and I prepare a sermon, and we prepare music, and we prepare activities, and we prepare things, and people come and go, and people come and go. This is insane. I should just quit. And normal people would say, yeah, you should quit. That's insane. You're stupid. Why are you stupid? Because the definition of insanity is doing things over and over again and expecting a different result. Simon sat here and he says, look, I've done this already. This is insane, but I will do it again. I'll do it again. Because you said so, I'll let down the nets. And when they had done, they caught a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners on the other boat to come and help them. And they came and they filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he said to Jesus, fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. So he went from being the master of the boat to the Lord of Peter's life. Do you see that? He went from being the master of the boat that he was in to being a personal Lord to Peter. You see how it changed that quickly? He said, for he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebediah, Simon's partner. Then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. So they pulled up their boats on shore, left everything, and followed him. See, when we start doing this stuff, when we start to walk over, you got to realize that things are going to be beyond your abilities. See, in verse 5, he said, Master, we have worked hard all night and have caught anything, but because you said so, I'll do it anyway. See, you get to the point when you're talking to somebody, you're like, God, I have talked to this person for 5 years. I have talked to this person for 2 years. They have told me to go away. They told me they don't care. They told me you don't listen. Insanity is for me to go back and talk to them again. But the answer has to be, because you said so, I'll still go. Because you told me to, I'll still go. There are people that I have personally talked to for years that may or may not someday walk in this church. There's people that I've talked to for years that have walked into this church. You guys heard the testimony from Kenny, who said, look, I've known him for a couple years. He's invited me. I've never came. And he kept contacting, and I keep contacting him, and I would talk to him about bikes and stuff, and I would squeeze in, hey, why don't you come visit us? I think you'll like it. And it took us needing a sign for him to get the sign that he needed to be here. Some of you I've talked to. Some of you, you've talked to each other. Some of you, you've talked to other people and said, hey, and you're like, no, I keep doing it. Tony tells me all the time. He says, I keep talking to this guy all the time. And I keep telling him, I'm still going to invite you. Simon says, I have fished all night long and we've caught nothing. But because you said so, I'll do it again. Because you tell me to, I'll do it again. See, that's insanity. Insanity is something goes beyond your abilities as well. The guy that invented the airplane, the Wright brothers, they told them they were insane. Man shouldn't be in the air. Right? When they decided to go to the moon, there's still people today that think that was a whole fake thing, that we made it all up in the studios at MGM or something. The satellites that are out there, they said, that's so stupid. You guys are looking at things that are beyond our abilities. We'll never be able to do those things. Now look at where we're at. Those of us that are 50 or older, you can say, God, I remember when you had to actually pick up a phone and you had to push buttons on it or spin a little thing around to make a phone call. I remember when they brought area codes. You didn't have area codes. You wanted to call out of state, you got an operator and said, hey, I want to call somebody in such and such a place. Now look at us. I remember when the only way you knew it was time to come home was not from a text from your mom, it was from the street lights coming on. That's how you knew. Or the lady at the house, 5 houses down that you were at, walked out and said, your mom said you better get home. You ever have that kind of message? Because mom just called the neighbor 5 houses down and said, hey, is little Jimmy over there? Yeah, Jimmy's over here. You better tell him to get his butt home. The lights came on. Things that are beyond our abilities, they continue to happen over and over again. Yet we are confined by believing that we can only do what's within our means. Simon says, look, I've done this. This was within his means. I fished, and I've caught absolutely nothing. So when he had done so, when he had done what Jesus had told him to do, he says their nets were so full they had to call in another boat. They had to call in another boat to come help them. And then their boats were so full it began to sink. God had blessed them so much for their obedience that their boats began to sink. Now you got to remember, they made their money not by taking people out so they can go preach to people in the middle of the sea there. They made their money by catching fish. That night they had fished all night and caught zero, which means they made $0. But if you know how businesses work, they spent money. Right? They still had maintenance on their boats. They still had people to help them. They had all that. He had a partner. They still spent money, but they made nothing. But Jesus said, look, here's what I want you to do. And they were like, okay, fine. If that's what you want me to do, I'll do it. And now they made a lot of money. Their boats were about to sink. When you do what God tells you to do, not only does He take care of your needs, He overflows and gives you more than you need. You're sad, God will not only make you happy, He'll make you joyful. There's a difference between happiness and joyfulness. You know that, right? Happiness is for a short period. It's an emotional thing. Joyful is an internal thing that lasts for a long time. You know, people say, Jesus has filled my cup. He's overflowing. This was an overflowing moment for Simon. Not only did the boat have fish in it, but it had so much the fish, the thing. Now, you know what you guys would do, what I would do? I'd be like, oh, thanks, God. Now you're going to sink my boat. You start to complain. Can we not have so much fish? My boats are going to sink. That's going to cost me more money. See, no joy. See, the ability that we have is limited by our power. The ability we have through Christ is unlimited. I would love to have been there and just standing on the shore and watching all this and seeing their face as they started to pull their nets in and all this fish was there and their boats were tilting over from the weight and they had to call someone else in to come and help pull that fish into their boat as well from one net. Doesn't say anything about dropping other nets other than that one net from that one boat or the nets from that one boat. But you know the face I'd really like to see? I tell you, I know each of us are under God's image, so I know God has to have a smart aleck bone in his body. Right? Because this church is filled with smart alecks, right? So we know that God had, and I can just see the smirk on Jesus' face like, what do you think now? Uh-huh. A little bit of fish going on there, isn't it? You asked and you received. Now what are you going to do? Now what are you going to do? So you got to be willing to go beyond the abilities of what you can do and lean on to the abilities of what God can do. You got to take it a step further. You got to stretch out. Even when people tell you you're insane, even when the people tell you you're stupid, if God's telling you to do it, you just do it. And you just keep doing it. And you just keep doing it until he says, okay, stop. Or here's your fish. Here's your fish. So we got to work beyond my abilities. We got to trust beyond my understanding, beyond what I can do. The second thing we notice from this story is what was the priority? The priority is people. So you got to remember what your priority is. Your priority when you're talking to someone about Christ is not adding a notch to your belt. It's not adding this, not reporting this. It's about the people. It's seeing that the kingdom of God is being built, not the kingdom of this church. See, I don't like, and for those who've been with me for a while, you've probably heard me talk about it. I haven't said it for a while, I believe. But see, I don't call you guys, when I'm talking to people, I don't ever call you guys congregation. You guys heard that word before? It's a common Christian word, right? It's not a bad word. It's a common Christian word. It's how we as pastors tell people who or how many people we have sitting out here staying awake while we're talking. So we call them a congregation. You know, it just means a bunch of people congregate together. It's a congregation. I don't like that. I've never called you guys a congregation. You know what I call you guys? What? Close. Construction workers. I call you guys construction workers. Why? What's your job? Build the kingdom of God. That's your job. So you're construction workers. You're constantly, each of us have a different job. Have you ever been to a construction site? I know Meat has, probably some of you have. You go to a construction site, what? There's the foreman, the guy that tells you what needs to be done today. And then there's people out there that do the things that need to be done that day. You got someone working a bulldozer. You got someone over here with the hammers and nails. You got someone over here cutting. You got someone carrying this. You got someone building this. And all of a sudden, with everybody working together in unison on a construction site, what happens? The building goes up. Right? And then what happens? People come in the building and it don't fall down on their head. You hope. So I don't call you guys a congregation. A congregation is just people that congregate together and they sit in a room. You guys aren't, your job isn't to come in here and sit together in a room. Your job is to come in here, get the plans for the week, and then run out and do them. to run out and build the kingdom of God, not to build this church. Yes, I would love for every seat in here to be filled. I would love for people to be back here. I'd love for us to say, look, I don't know what we're going to do. Chris, we need a TV upstairs. We're sending people upstairs for the service. I don't know what else to do. Here's what we got to do. Oh, my God, we got to be outside now. I'd love for that, but that's not the goal. That's not the goal. The goal is to build the kingdom, not to build a church. Now, the purpose of the church is to empower people, to make people disciples, to train them, to equip them, to prepare them to go out and focus on the people. It's a place for us to come together and say, look, I need to refuel, I need to re-worship, I need to regather, I need to know what I'm supposed to be doing so I can go out and do it. But if you're coming here to get your Jesus on, you come here for the wrong reason. If you come here to get instructions for the week, if you came to get your plans for the week, if you come to get what God has for you for the week, this is the right place to come. People's favorite saying when they don't go to church anymore is, oh, well, Jesus didn't tell us to go to church. He told us to be the church. Are you being the church? I don't think so. Because you haven't got any instructions. You haven't got the plans. You're not working with someone. You ever try to build a house by yourself? It ain't fun. Those boards get heavy, don't they? And it's a lot of fun getting on one ladder, trying to figure out how to hold a board up there, and then get down that ladder, walk across to the other ladder, and try to get that board. What happens when you get up here to get this board up? That board falls. You can't get anything level without two people. Then you add 3, you add 4, you add 5, you start building something. The more people you add with different skill sets, the better the building. It's great to have a house, but if you don't put electric in it, it kind of sucks, don't it? It's wonderful to have a house, but if you don't put plumbing in it, it kind of sucks, don't it? If you live in South Carolina, it's great to build a house, but if you don't put AC in it, nobody's going to come visit you. I'm just being real. You come to church to gather together to get our instructions so that we can go out and fulfill those instructions during the week. People are like, I don't need to go to church. How miserable are you? I can tell you, I miss one Sunday because me and my wife or whatever, I miss one Sunday. I usually miss, 4 a year, Chris, I think is what we do. I feel like I don't know you guys when I come back. I'm like, what have they been up to? What have they been doing? I don't know anything. I'm lost. And it's like, you only been gone one Sunday. You were here Sunday night. You were here Tuesday. What's the problem? I don't know. I just feel like I'm lost. I don't know what the plan is. I don't know what's going on. I think it's a coup. They're all up to something. I get paranoid. Why? Because I miss out on the plan. What are we doing? How is the construction going? What are we doing here? Do you understand what I'm saying? It's about the people. The people have to be your priority. Look at Luke 5, 9 through 10. He says, for he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. So when James and John and the son of Zebedee, Simon's partner, then Jesus said to them, don't be afraid. Now you will fish for people. Now you will fish for people. Now, I want you to back up just a minute a little bit. Where's verse 10? Where's the rest of it? What version are you using? No, there's the second part of 10 is then Jesus said to Simon. You don't see it? Anybody else's Bible weird? Mine says that's part of 10. Anybody else? No? Yes, no, maybe? Remember how this works? You got to talk to me or I keep asking questions. Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, so it ain't on there. So anyway, so he says, now you will fish for men. Now, let's back up just 1 second. We're trying not to take too long on it. How did this whole thing start? So Jesus entered the boat. Huh? No, that's not it. That's 11. That says 11. Huh? This is an NIV. I don't know what that is. I mean, if they put it on 11, don't be afraid now you will catch them in, whatever. But it's 10b in my Bible. So let's back up just for a second now that we're completely off the track. Let's back up for a second, okay? So how this all started. So Simon and Peter were sitting there. Simon was sitting there with his friends, his buddies, his work partners, and they had just finished fishing. They were tired. They were whatever. They were cleaning their nets, and that way they could have them prepared for tomorrow. So what were they cleaning their nets? They're getting all the slime and stuff off of their nets, right? Why? So they wouldn't mess up. So they're cleaning their nets. They got them over there. And Jesus walks in and says, hey, take me out on your boat here for a minute. So he goes out there, and they take him out on his boat, and they sit there in a little bit, and Jesus starts talking to each other. Like I said, we don't know what he's saying. So the first thing that happened was that Jesus showed up, and Jesus said, hey, I want you to take me somewhere. I want to go somewhere so I can tell other people. So Simon takes him out there. He sits in the boat. We don't know what he said. We don't know how. We know that obviously what he said, Simon must have been listening because he responds to the whole thing near the end. So he sits there. This is happening. And then after Jesus gets done speaking, he tells Simon, he says, look, I want you to cast your net out here. I want you to cast your net. Okay, so we talked about that. He casts his net, first he says no. You don't understand. He doesn't say no, but he says, look, you don't understand. I've already done this. He tries to talk him out of it, right? Basically. And he says, fine, I'll do it. He throws his net in there. I'm sure he's sitting there thinking, this is so stupid. You know how you guys act. This is so stupid. Got to throw my net out here. I ain't going to catch nothing but this crazy man gets in my boat, and he wants me to do it. I'll do it. So he throws the net out there, and he's like, watch this. It's going to come out empty. So you can imagine he grabs the net, and he's like, and it doesn't come up like it's supposed to. You know what I mean? Like it was empty. And all of a sudden it's full, and he starts pulling it up. And he has to call for help. So what was the first thing that Simon did with all that? The first thing Simon did was he allowed Jesus into his boat. He wasn't in his life yet. He wasn't, but he let him in the boat. He let him in the house. See, guys, this is how this whole thing starts. We got to first get Jesus into people's hearts. Get her into their lives. Okay? Get them in the area. Jesus was in the boat. He wasn't in his life because he only called him master because he paid, he was in charge of the boat. He was following his direction in the boat. He didn't call him Lord. He called him master. Then after something happened, he said, oh, I'm going to call you Lord. And he realized who he was, right? Because he said, I'm not, what? Get away from me. He told Jesus to get away from him. Because I'm not worthy to be around you. I'm not worthy to get around you. And then, when they got to shore, Jesus said, he's like, I'm abandoning everything. I'm following you because I just know what you just did. He said, I'm going to make you fisher of men. See, Simon understood that because he understood that the fact that to be a fisherman of men, the first thing I do is let Jesus into my life. I got to let him into my heart. The second thing I had to do is I got to listen to what he tells me to do when he tells me to do it. Even if it don't make sense. And then when Jesus says pull, you pull. So all those times that we're sitting here and dealing with people, and Jesus, or you get this feeling, and I'm going to tell you it's God, but you get this feeling, the Holy Spirit's talking to you, and you get this feeling, it says, oh, I need to reach out to so-and-so, and you decide not to do it. Then that might have been either an opportunity for you to water or an opportunity for you to pull the nets in and it'd be full. But you're like, I've talked to them yesterday. I'll talk to them tomorrow. I'm not bothering with it. I'm not doing it. See, this changed everything for Simon. Not only did he leave the fishing business, but he left what he knew to go into something that he had to be completely dependent on Jesus telling him what to do. He'd never done this before. He'd never fished for men. Have any of you guys tried to fish for men? I mean, I have on accident. I'm sure some of you went fishing, have accidentally fished for men. You went there and cast it, and you're like, and somebody's ear screaming back there because you just hooked them. Huh? It was your ear. You probably did it yourself, though. But you can understand how this changed. It was crazy that he asked him to do it. But Simon understood, look, I'm going to go from fishing from people to now fishing for men. I'm going to go and make an impact on this world. And we know from stories how this did change, how everything has changed, how the boat has overfilled because of this one obedience. This is the one obedience that he had, was to simply, I will follow you no matter where you go. And it's going to be insane. It's going to be crazy. Can you imagine what his family must have said? Look, dude, we got enough fish for the year now. You just made bank. What are you doing? Keep that lucky Jesus around. We like him. Can I borrow your Jesus tomorrow? I need more fish. See, it's got to be about the people. Jesus was all about the people. He didn't care about the fish. He didn't say, okay, now that you got this fish, cash it in, get the money, and then go follow me. Do you guys see that? I know your Bible seemed like it's a little bit different than mine, but do you see that anywhere in your Bible? No. They came back with all the fish, and he said, let's go. We're leaving. Look at Luke chapter 19, verse 10. Hopefully that one will be up there. It says, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Now you see there's two parts of that, right? What's the first part? What was the first thing he came for? To seek. Why would he need to seek something? To find it. Why? Because you're lost. You're lost. Now, my thoughts are, and these are my thoughts, if you seek something, if you're looking for something lost, what does that typically mean? It was mine to begin with. Right? It was mine to begin with. When I seek something, when I've looked for something that's lost, I'm most likely looking for something that I've lost or my wife has lost. See, he's looking for something that's lost, something that belonged to him. And the Bible says we were created under God's images. He knew us before we were in our mother's womb. So he comes to seek you first, and then when he finds you, he comes to save you. Save you from what? Yourself? What else? What else do you need saving from? The world. What else? Sin. What else? Eternal death. Hell. Yeah, we don't like to say that, but it's okay. You can say hell in church. It's a real place, guys. It's a significantly real place. So he came to seek us. He came to find us. And then when he found us, he didn't say, okay, good, I found you. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. No, he knows you're in danger. He knows you're in a risky spot. He knows you're in a place of failure. So he says, look, I've come to not only seek you, to find you, but I came to save you. I've come to pull you out of where you're at. See, it's all about the people. We are a priority to God, and therefore we should be a priority to each other. Do you hear me? We are a priority to God. We should be a priority to each other. We should be seeking to build the kingdom of heaven in everything we do. The third thing is we've got to remember the focus is on potential. The focus is on potential. What is our little motto, our saying here at the church? Anybody remember? It's written on the motorcycle over there if you're not sure. That's our verse. It's written on that little motorcycle over there. We don't care where you came from. We only care about what? Where you're going. What does that mean? We care about the potential. We care about what could happen. We care about the things that God can do through your life. Look at Matthew 9:9. He says, Jesus went from there, and he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. He didn't look at Matthew and say, oh, you're a tax collector, you're no good to me. He looked at the potential of what Matthew could do for the kingdom. He looked past his past. He looked past where he was at, and he looked forward into the future of what Matthew could do. It's funny that Matthew wrote about himself. Apparently he likes to write that, but he wanted you to know, look, this is what God did. This is what Jesus did. This is what I do. You got to look past where someone's at. And you got to look at the potential of what God can do for them. A lot of times we look at people and we say, oh, well, God can't use them with the past that they had. Usually the worse the past, the more God will use them. The more of an impact that they have. I look at the worst people as the greatest potential. Why? Because they're the ones that realize they need God more than the people that are successful. For some reason, they don't realize that. There's potential in every one of us. We just got to be willing to look past ourselves and look towards God for that. Look at Ephesians with me. Chapter 2, verse 10. It says, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." What does that mean? If He's prepared it in advance for us to do, what does that mean? That means there's potential. Right? Where you're at right now, even if you think you've matched or you've maxed out where you can do, you've maxed out the greatest you can do, where you're at right now, there's potential for more. There's always potential to do more. Weightlifting sucks. Anybody ever weightlift? Weightlifting sucks. Why? Because you hit that plateau, right? Man, I've been at 200 pounds on my bench press for a month now, and I cannot get past it. You got two choices there. You can stay there, you can go backwards, or what's the third choice? You keep pushing. But what always happens? What happens? If you keep pushing, what happens? Always happens. You get stronger, which means you hit it. You finally break that 200. Then 6 months, a year, 2 years later, you look back and you go, man, I'm at 250 now, and I can remember I couldn't even get 200 a month ago, a year ago, whatever. Because the difference is those people look at the potential. I know I can do this. I don't know why I'm not doing it. I can see past right now. I know that this is possible. I know I can do it. But you get those roadblocks, you get those barriers where you're like, I've been doing this for 6 weeks now, and I can't get past this weight. But you look at the potential. I know I have the right size. I know I'm doing this. There's something I got to do. There's a potential to get better, but I got to keep pushing myself to get better. So when you set a goal, let's say you start lifting and you've never lifted before, and you're like, look, I'm at 120. I can bench press 100 pounds. That's where I'm at right now. So you set a goal. What's your goal? Anybody here said, I'm at 100 pounds right now. In 6 months, I want to be able to bench press 300 pounds. How many of you think that's a good idea? It's an unrealistic, right? So what do? You set a realistic goal, right? I'm at 100 pounds right now. I want to be at 125 in 3 months. Okay, that's realistic. Do you stop there? Once you hit 125, what do? Keep going where? Why? I've already hit that goal. Why do I need to keep going? Why? There's potential for improvement. There's always potential. And so when we look at the potential in ourselves, we look in the potential of others, we see that there's always something you can do better. Seth gave me a book the other day, and I was looking in the back of it. It's an old book. It's a 1960-something book. It was written, the last edition that I got was 1970. It's a car, an automobile encyclopedia. And it got from the Indianapolis 500. That's a race. Anybody knows? Okay. So it's with cars. In 1911 is when it started in the book, so I'm assuming that's when it really started, and it stopped at 1969 because that was the last edition of this book. All right. The top speed in 1911, the guy that won it in 6 hours and something. It's like 6 hours and 11 minutes, whatever it was. 6 hours. Top speed, the max that he could go was 74 miles an hour. 6 hours to do the Indianapolis 500 at 74 miles an hour. Now, he could have said, I am the best. I have done the best. Nobody needs to try to beat this. But you know, somebody said, there's potential to go faster. You know somebody said that. How do I know that? Because in 1969, the guy that won it in 3 hours and so many minutes, doing 150-something miles an hour. And I promise you that if I kept going, the time got smaller and the speed got faster. Because somebody keeps saying, I think we can go faster. I think we can do it in shorter time. There's potential to do better. See, we got to quit looking at people and say, look, this is where you're at now. You took 6 hours to do something. You're at 74 miles an hour. That's the best you're ever going to get, buddy, right there. And that's what we do to people. Instead of looking at them and go, you know what? I bet you, with God's help, you could be doing it in 3 hours at 176 miles an hour. But we don't like to do that with people. We like to place them where they're at and leave them there, instead of looking at their potential. What can they become? What can they do? What can God work through them? Because God can do anything He wants. He took a tax collector. He took a fisherman, and He made something out of them. He took a drug addict, an alcoholic, a bully, and He made something out of them. A thief, a beggar. He don't care. He didn't look at where they're at. He looked at their potential. What can you do? He looked at Paul and said, Paul, you went around and killed people. You went around and hunted Christians. Your whole plan was you came up with how to make this happen, where they would be. You investigated where Christians would go. This is who Paul was. You guys know who Paul is? Kind of a big guy in our Christian history? Yeah. This is who he was. But Jesus said, look, I see potential in him. And look at what he ended up doing. Now, that we know from the Bible that the apostles, they didn't see that. They had to be convinced because they were afraid. Here comes Saul. Now Paul walks in and they're thinking, okay, well, he's here to kill us because that's what he does. They saw him where he was, but they were quickly seeing through God what he was going to be. And he planted more churches than anybody else. He's the founder of the churches that we have today. God looked at the potential in people. We need to start looking at people through God's eyes, not through our own. The next thing it takes is a next step. You got to be willing to take the next step. So you got to go and think, okay, this is going to go beyond my abilities. I'm going to have to trust you, God. I got to remember that the priority is the people. And then I got to remember that they have potential. There's potential for things. Look at them not where they're at, but where they can be. And then it requires us to take a next step. In Matthew 9, verse 10, it says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. You see the potential with what he did with Matthew? He now was able to reach many tax collectors. Many sinners were there at the table with him. So the next step for Matthew was not only to receive God, but he prepared a dinner and invited people to come and have dinner with Christ. That was his next step. I've received him. Now I want to share him with other people. And he invited them into his home, and they broke bread together, and Jesus was able to talk to them about what was going on. Look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. It says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So they may see your good deeds. So they can see what you do, but they can see who gives you the power to do it. Who gives you the strength to do it. Who gives you the knowledge, the wisdom to do the good deeds. Do you see that? You see the difference here? They see your good deeds, but it's not you who gets the credit for your good deeds. Who gets the credit for it? So who's the focus on? People. Because the people don't focus on you, you're doing your things so that people can see God. You don't do your things so people can see you. You do your things so people can see God. And see, that's where we get all mixed up in our Christianity is that we forget that what we're doing is not for ourselves, but we're doing it for the kingdom. We forget that what we're doing is not for our glory, but we're doing it for God's glory. And it's very quick and very easy to fall into that in the ministry. Because what happens if you're a good pastor? People start telling you, what? You're a good pastor. If you're a good pastor, they start, oh, I love listening to your sermons. Oh, I love the way, I've been to other churches, and I love the way you preach. I got to come listen to you. I love the way you preach. And what happens? You're like, oh, okay. Maybe I am good at this. I tried other churches, man, and your church is the only one that I feel like I belong in. It's because, you've done such a good job, and you start thinking about yourself. And it requires you to go beyond that and say, wait a minute, this isn't about me. This has nothing to do with me. Paul says it a lot, that he says that the more I get closer to God, and I'm paraphrasing, the closer I get to God, the more I hate me. Because I realize how sinful I am. How the pride of being me gets in the way. And I've got to isolate myself from me so I can get closer to who God is. So there's a couple questions I wrote on your handouts. One of them is, what's stopping you from walking across the room? What is your excuse for not telling somebody? What's your excuse for not planting the seed? What's your excuse for not watering? What's your excuse for not being the laborer when the harvest is ready? Is it laziness? Is it, I don't think I know anything? You know your story. I guarantee you, every one of you in here, if I came to you and said, I needed X, Y, and Z, if you knew somebody that could help me, you would give me that information. You might even call the person for me and say, hey, so-and-so needs something. I'm going to have them call you because they need such and such. Some of you may even say, hey, I'll go over there with you and talk to them to make sure you get a good deal. But when someone calls you with a problem, is the first thing out of your mind is, look, I know someone that can help you with that? Or is your first thing is saying, I'll pray for you, and you move on? Do you pick up the phone and immediately when you hear someone's in trouble and you start calling God and say, look, God, I need you to help me with this person. There's a seed that's been planted. There's an opportunity to plant the seed right now. Please give me the wisdom and the strength to do what you're asking me to do. And then take that step to do it. What is it that's keeping you from walking across the room and talking to somebody? Another question I have on there is, who have you invited to come to the Christmas Eve service? There's people that won't come to church for any other time, but almost undoubtedly people will come to a Christmas Eve service. Have you invited anybody? The beautiful thing about the Christmas Eve service is it's not about me preaching. I don't even preach on Christmas Eve services. If you haven't been here, I don't preach on Christmas Eve. I don't know why. I told Chris, I said, I just got this thing. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the story. So we just tell the story. It's a time for us to all come together and sing. So in between the stories, there's a song to sing. And so there's a song that goes with every piece of the story that we tell. And then there's a beautiful candlelight service. At the end, the lights go down. We light the candles. We've done it for 4 years, and every year it's just as moving to me as it was the first year we did it. We tweak a little bit here and there, but basically it's the same story. Why? Because it's the same story. What are you going to do? It's the same story. It's the meaning behind it is what's the most important, not the theatrics of it, but the meaning behind it. So who have you invited? How have you said? Well, let me back up. Have you committed to coming? And then secondly, who have you invited to come with you? It's a very special night. It's, like I said, it's one of my favorite nights just because it's completely 100% about God. We remove us as much as we can, and we make it about us worshiping God, not about us listening to somebody else. To who have you invited? And I think the third question I want on there is, who have you shared Jesus with? Who have you, whether verbally, whether through your life? Now, unless you haven't talked to anybody in the last week, if you haven't talked to nobody in the last week, if you've been completely isolated, all by yourself, have not spoken to a family member, have not spoken to a friend, haven't been to a grocery store, haven't been to a gas station, if you have literally been in one room all by yourself for this week, then you're excused from that question. But if you've walked out of that room and made contact with anybody, Facebook, text, phone calls, is there someone that you know you should have said something to and you didn't? What's keeping you from walking across the room?